Hi, welcome to What's Up Williston, our monthly TV show where we take a closer look at things going on in our community. I'm your host, Erik Wells. I'm pleased to be joined this month by David Saladino. He's the Managing Director at VHB in South Burlington. We're going to talk about the Chittenden County I-89 2050 study. VHB is partnering with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission on this project. There's 37 miles of interstate in the county, and it's a vital cog of our transportation infrastructure, as I'm sure most people are aware of out there. They drive it frequently. So David, thanks a lot for coming on the program.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So I want to talk about what are we looking at here? What is this study and why is it needed right now?
Yeah, it's good transportation planning often looks 10, 20, 30 years out because big projects like this don't tend to happen overnight. And so having an opportunity to step back and look out at projections of growth and transportation growth throughout the county over the next 30 years really is an important thing to do so that we can line up and prioritize improvements over that time frame. 2 years ago, when the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission was looking at growth and transportation improvements around the county as part of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, they did a lot of public outreach to get ideas and thoughts for transportation improvements over the next 20 years within Chittenden County. Once that process got to the end, what they found was that a segment of I-89 in kind of between Burlington and Winooski was showing overcapacity, congested. And so at the time, it became a really hot topic. It's something that it could go one way or the other. If you add lanes that you add capacity, it gets rid of some of the congestion. Some people didn't feel that you needed the extra capacity. It would make it easier to drive and steer us away from public transportation and other modes.
Interesting.
And so at the time, the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission decided to kind of put a thumbtack in it, move that out as a separate study to look at I-89 over the next 30 years, finalize their regional transportation plan, and then key up this study to look more closely at the interstate itself. And so that's what got us started back in May on this study, looking exclusively at I-89.
Just within Chittenden County.
Exactly.
So kind of narrow the focus right there.
That's right.
So kind of taking a step back, the interstate highway, I know they were implemented 1950s, 1960s. A lot of the infrastructure design, I think, was based off the German Autobahn, ways to quickly move people around the country.
And I think to land military planes.
Yes, yeah, I remember that in school too.
Straightaways every so often so that you could land, fighter jets if you needed.
Yeah.
Kind of strange.
Yeah, it's an interesting history behind it.
Absolutely.
And what's its role in moving traffic that we look at as a traffic engineer? How vital is the interstate?
One way the traffic engineers tend to look at roadway classifications by functional classification, that some group of folks have identified the different categories. The interstate facilities are at the top, and so their primary role is moving people long distances at higher speeds. At the other end of the spectrum are kind of local roads, neighborhood streets and so forth. And so you can imagine the gradations between those. And so what we really, the idea behind the interstate system and freeways in general are to move traffic, longer distances and minimize the amount of access points. So you think about Williston Road, for example, with driveways every 50 feet. It's hard to go fast just because there's a lot of turns in and out. With the interstate, it's a limited access facility, so you have just discrete locations where there's opportunities to get on and off to minimize the conflicts. What we've seen, particularly at exit 14, where we have a full clover leaf interchange, underneath Route 2, as you're going underneath, you've got cars coming in and off at the same time. And that weave zone is, as we've looked at already, is a little bit undersized. And so it can be a little bit tense as you're trying to weave in and out of traffic under there.
I've been there.
Yep. And we've seen there's a fairly high rate of crashes in that location because of that kind of under design.
So when these interchanges were originally put in, I know we haven't added a new interchange since the interstate was constructed for the most part. Looked at kind of the major interior roadways within the county to meet up with kind of where the people are, where they're going, and that was the thought behind it. Imagine the land played a big role in that too, to figure out where exactly these would fit.
It's interesting. One of the early steps of this study, we did go back and look at all the way back to, I think it was 1955, was the initial alignment study for 89 through Chittenden County. It's a beautiful report. You don't see reports, it's got a hand-drawn sketch of the Burlington waterfront. some nicely hand-drawn maps. But it was interesting to see there were 7 different alignments that were identified, basically just drawn on a map for 89. A couple of them, it's funny, went along the Winooski River. One went up Muddy Brook. It was almost as if they weren't looking at the terrain, or I think environmental restrictions and protections were just less then. So nowhere on there do we see any kind of sensitive resources or wetlands or streams. It was just what's the best way to get from here to there. As you drive the interstate now, you can see a lot of places where there was just some big cuts right next to rivers. You've got them going through would now be protected kind of sensitive lands. But the times were different in the 60s. You could get away with getting, building roads more, where they fell on the map. And so it was an interesting opportunity to kind of trace the history of the interstate placement originally.
So you said the study started back in May. I wonder if you could walk me through what's taken place so far, and when you start something like this and what the work product looks like at the end, what are all the pieces to it? What's involved? And we'll get a little involved more with public participation here along the way too as well.
Yep. I wonder if we could go to the project overview slide, which does show. Well, this highlights the overall study area, as Erik mentioned, 37 miles. Be looking at all of those plus all 7 interchanges along the way. The overall goals of the study, as we get into this, our charge is really to look at the capacity of the interstate and the interchanges to make sure going out 30 years that there's sufficient capacity, that safety, operational, and resiliency issues are addressed. One of the things that we're in the midst of right now is defining or refining this vision and goals for the corridor. So what is it that people want to see out here over the next 30 years? Coming out of all of that, we develop a set of alternatives, some improvements that can meet those issues. And then working through we have a technical and advisory committee working with those committees to develop an implementation plan. So kind of phased approach to improvements over the next 30 years. I think if we go through 2 more, this slide here. This shows a little more graphically kind of the process. So we're moving left to right on the graphic. We kicked off the project back in May. The colored bars at the top kind of see this as 3 main steps with the process. So we're kind of just ending the discovery phase now, and this is our first round of public outreach. So we're trying to be everywhere, all the time to try to get as much input as we can. That will then feed into the next phase. So once we've had an opportunity, we've looked at the corridor, we've looked at lots of data. We're now getting input from the public. We then go into trying out different bundles or packages of projects to see what works best. We then move, as we get into kind of next spring of 2021, into the decision-making process, and then that's really where we kind of take this funnel with all of the ideas that have been developed, the kind of bundles and packages of alternatives. Out of that comes one preferred package of solutions to move forward with, and so that next summer we'll get wrapped up into a final report.
So we're kind of looking, it's like a year and a half or so scope for the project.
That's right. Yep. And we have 3 defined public input opportunities throughout the process. We're in the first one right now. We had our first public meeting in South Burlington last 2 weeks ago. We'll be in Williston at the town offices this Thursday evening. And then we'll be in Winooski on the 13th of 11th of March.
So what does this public meeting look like? Or what questions will folks be asked? How should they have an opportunity to provide their input? Kind of give them an idea. What's the engagement going to look like?
Yeah. So right off the bat, we have there will be dinner there. So anyone who's who's interested in this and also wants free dinner. So first thing, you'll see food, but then we've got a couple of boards up with some questions. And Post-it notes for people to put up, and the questions read, what's one thing you'd like to see improved on I-89? And I think the other one is what's the biggest issue that you have right now with I-89? And then on the way out, we ask 2 more questions. One is a set of goals. Which do you feel are the most important goals for the corridor? And then if you could make one change tomorrow on 89, what would that be? So those are the prompted questions, and then certainly over the meeting we'll have a brief presentation. We're trying to keep it us talking to a minimum and really listening, but we'll go through the background, some of this information around the interstate itself, how traffic has grown over time, where growth is projected to happen. And then we're really opening up for thoughts and ideas. What we really want to pin down at this point, in addition to ideas for improvement, is around the vision goals for the study. We have as many people, close to 200,000 people in the county, and you probably poll each of them, and they all probably have some different vision of what 2050 is going to look like.
Yeah.
And so that's it's an interesting piece, is to try to get people's ideas, to try to get them onto paper for, what does Chittenden County in 2050 look like? And then what role does the interstate play in that future? We have a sketch artist who's going to be there, who's been drawing, as he listens to keywords come up, kind of drawing this vision of the corridor. And
it's really interesting.
It turned out really, really cool during the South Burlington meeting.
Oh, cool.
And then that will all get folded into one kind of composite graphic that we'll be able to use to hopefully try to show what that vision looks like.
If folks can't make it to the meeting, there's a project website as well, and there's ways to gather engagement that way.
Yep. There's lots of opportunities. There's it's envision89.com with an E, Envision89. We'll be running a live stream on that website on the evening, this Thursday evening. So if you can't make it in person to the meeting, you can just go to Envision89. There'll be right on the homepage a click here button that takes you there, and there'll be a YouTube video of the meeting, and you'll be able to post questions that we can read out during the public meeting. There's also opportunities, there's surveys and some questionnaires on the website itself if you'd like to fill that out.
Okay, so a lot of different opportunities for folks to get involved here.
Yep.
I wanted to back up a second. You're talking about the implementation phase, when it's finally time to decide where to invest the funds. And I know with transportation funding, and especially the interstate being a federal highway for the most part, and then we have a lot of money that trickles in from the state as well. What's the funding structure look like for something of this, and who are the decision makers? Is it a collaboration amongst stakeholders at different levels of government? Who's going to have kind of the final say here, and in what direction that things go in? Yeah,
those are good questions. The way that the study has been set up, we have, I mentioned before, a technical and an advisory committee. The technical committee is fairly small and is charged, it's primarily VTrans, there's a couple of municipal representatives, and then the project team. Their task is really to deal with kind of the technical issues as they come up, how best to display information, how do we model growth along the corridor. And then we have an advisory committee that's much larger. We're close to 30 people. It's and intentionally a very diverse group of stakeholders, kind of on both sides of thoughts, different ideas as you can think through. And so that group has been basically charged with making the final decision on the package of improvements. And so when we get to that point probably late next summer, there'll be lots of opportunities for input. All of their meetings are public, but ultimately that group will be kind of giving an up or down vote on the preferred package. In terms of dollars, the monies as the regions, the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission's long-range transportation plan was developed out to 2050. One of the requirements of that, this is a federally required plan update for the region. They had to project how much transportation dollars would be available over that time frame. And it's both a mix of federal and state dollars. And so they've kind of done the hard work already to figure out how much money is available. Most of that money got programmed through other things in the transportation plan. So all of the other improvements, the Champlain Parkway, the Exit 16 improvements, all the new sidewalks and new lanes and new traffic lights, that's all already kind of has been resolved in this transportation plan. And so where we're left is kind of the one unknown question is kind of what happens on I-89.
Oh. Lots of pieces.
Yes, for sure.
It's interesting, everything that goes into, it's a large scope for a study here and a vital cog of our transportation network.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, maybe we dial it into Williston. We talked a little bit regionally what the end game is going to be, but for folks listening out there, Exit 12 in Williston, any initial thoughts on future there, how it's functioning, some things you've looked at so far?
Yep, so we've looked, one of the first tasks that we did was to look at the existing conditions along the entire interstate, which includes both kind of growth and development around the interchanges, as well as looking at traffic volumes, looking at crash data, environmental resources. So one of our deep dives so far has been on the Exit 12 area. We found there are a couple of designated high crash locations. So these are intersections or segments of road that have more crashes than kind of a statewide limit. Those are then classified as high crash locations. Those tend to point out where the most unsafe locations are. So we've got 2 of those at each of the off ramps.
Oh, geez.
Not surprisingly,
Yeah.
we are definitely missing some sidewalk infrastructure through the interchange, as witnessed just about every day. We see people trying to walk between the Jersey barriers underneath the interstate, which is very scary.
Yeah.
And then just overall capacity, it's a fairly limited underneath the interstate. You've got 4 lanes. You want to have some turn lanes to get back on the interstate, which there isn't the room underneath the interstate. So that limits capacity there. So we do see some congestion today, and that gets worse over time without any improvements. 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, there was a scoping study for the Exit 12 area that looked at a set of improvements, one being a full interchange redo, some additional lanes underneath the interstate on Route 2A, and then connecting into an expanded grid network in the Taft's Corner area.
So one of the outcomes from this study may be additional added pieces to Exit 12, just depending on what you find and
Exactly.
where things end up.
Yep. And or at a minimum, just a reconfirmation that is the right set of improvements, and then making sure that it's kind of phased or staged at the appropriate time when it's most needed, in consideration of the other improvements on the interstate.
Because the average daily traffic flow must be a lot different than when they originally put the interstate in there, but we didn't have any real development there. It was still farmers' fields and Route 2A probably back in the 50s.
Absolutely, that's right. And now we see Williston being one of the fastest growing towns in the state. And so how does the 1960s infrastructure handle that growth? And we are where we are.
Yeah, and that location with the interchange right there is advantageous to our commercial and industrial center. So
That's right.
It's kind of making them all match up and work.
Yep. There's plans moving forward for a new park and ride, a V-Trans park and ride just on the south of the interchange, which I think will help to take some pressure off of the Exit 11 park and ride in Richmond, which is often over capacity. But that will also be drawing in some more trips potentially from outside of Williston. So, those, in addition to kind of the commercial and retail development, we also have some other movement afoot with State Police Barracks and the park and ride moving to the south side of the interchange, which will change the kind of dynamics as well.
I know one component for a study like this could be a decision that a new interchange may be necessary for the future. I know that's one component of the much larger project, and not to get too focused on specifics, but is this a probable outcome that you could find there might be a new interchange along the Chittenden County corridor, just seeing what traffic patterns are looking like and growth?
Yeah, specifically in our scope of work, well, I guess stepping back, in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, in the regional plan, the plan right now, if you were to go and look at it online, it does have a new third lane between Exit 14 and 15, so between Burlington and Winooski.
Oh, okay.
And a new interchange at where Heinsberg Road crosses over the interstate, so it's also known as Exit 12B for
yes.
those who've been involved. So the plan right now, kind of as placeholders, has that additional lane and a new interchange. As the RPC was finalizing the plan, they knew that this study would be coming up to kind of further flesh that out, but kept those in the plan. And so part of our scope of work is to see whether that additional lane in fact is needed and whether a new interchange is needed at this location at Heinsberg Road, or maybe somewhere different, or maybe no new interchange, but maybe we need to expand Exit 14 or add more movements at Exit 13 with 189 because you can't quite make all of the turns. You can't get off onto Dorset Street if you want, for example. And so our charge is really to look at any new lane widenings or new or expanded interchanges. That's one of the charges that we're going to be looking at. So we have a set of interchange locations going from a potential one serving Bolton, potentially the Exit 12B at Heinsberg Road. We'll be looking at Exit 13 fully. Looking at Exit 14, potentially a different configuration. Right now, the cloverleaf, don't really build cloverleafs anymore for a variety of reasons, one of which is they take up a lot of space. And so potentially a tighter configuration that has more capacity could work at Exit 14. And then just moving up Exit 15, we'll be looking at potentially what would it look like if you had all 4 approaches at Exit 14 open. And then there's an exit 17N up north in Milton that has been talked about. We'll be looking at that as well.
Oh, kind of the industrial park area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've never heard about that in other capacities.
Yep. So we obviously want to get as much other input as we can, but starting off the process, that was one of our tasks that we knew we'd be looking at as we move forward. It's not to say any of those are going to move forward, that any of them will be either work functionally or have kind of approval of stakeholders in general, but we'll be doing the analysis just to confirm that.
I get the sense project pieces of that, new interchanges, lane widening, that would be the higher price points for some of these.
The lane widening for sure, and then added on top of that, if it's a bridge or some kind of structure going over the Winooski River, let's say, that then kind of exponentially gets more expensive.
And you have other things with an interchange, some land easements, some additional right-of-ways that may be needed there.
That's right. Yep.
I think for folks to keep in perspective too, we're looking at a 30-year, we're visioning for 2050. So there's some of these pieces I'm probably identify short, medium, longer term. Is that a correct
exactly
way to look at it?
Yeah, because we're talking, new interchange maybe in the $50 million range, which we don't see projects like that come through in Vermont all that often. I believe the overall, I think VTrans's budget, I could be wrong on this, is about $20 million a year, or $200 million a year, and so. This would represent 1/4 of all, including all the paving, all of the sanding, salting, plowing, and so I think this will obviously be a multi-year process that won't happen tomorrow.
And here talk at the federal level, our infrastructure in this country was built in the 50s, 60s, and there's a lot of need throughout the country for some improvements and replacements. So I guess we'd have to look, and there's additional federal monies along the way that could affect us as well, I imagine.
There are programs in place that determine each state's allocation of federal dollars. One of the maybe a little off topic of this study, but one of the main funding issues with transportation dollars is that the funds primarily come through gas taxes. And as cars get more fuel efficient and we see more and more electric vehicles on the network, there's just less gas being bought. And so the dollars that are coming into the transportation fund to fund these improvements is getting less and less. But there's still more and more cars on the road, but the dollars coming in. And so there's been lots of, subcommittees formed and focus groups and trying to figure out what the right approaches to be able to raise the monies to fund these types of improvements. They all involve the dreaded tax word, and so nobody really wants to talk about that specific in an election year. But that is a kind of a looming question of where those dollars are going to come from.
Well, it's interesting, these other pieces of working to get more electric vehicles on the road, but then thinking, okay, how can you use a charge for charging up your car, a cost associated with that? What are the trade-offs for gas, like you mentioned? It's a really interesting public policy discussion on this stuff.
Right. We certainly don't want to, we want to encourage electric vehicles and don't want to encourage people to drive gas guzzlers, but it does have implications on gas taxes.
Yeah. So I guess I covered most of the questions we want to get through, David. I wanted to ask you for the public participation in this project. Why is it important for residents to be engaged in this?
It's really interesting. We had, I mentioned our first public session 2 weeks ago, and it's as much as we've been looking at this for 6 months straight, working on the study, and the questions and comments that have come up both in the public session and have come in online. Many of them are ones that I wouldn't have thought of, and our team, we get kind of focused on the technical details, and some of the specifics. We had former police officer had some thoughts about where he saw the most collisions happen, and they weren't showing up necessarily on high crash location maps, but once we dug into some of the geometrics in those locations, that type of thing was really helpful. That's a very specific example, but the input that we're getting is important, and it will help to shape kind of some of the ideas and thoughts as we move forward. I think one of the more interesting discussions that happened in South Burlington was around whether we need to expand the system or not, and if not, what are some other ways to handle the growth in need to get from A to B? And so lots of talk about cyclists, more cycling opportunities between locations, more opportunities for ability to walk, abilities to work from home, locating things close to each other so that you don't have to get in your car, you can walk to stores, and all of those things are the direction that the county is heading in. But if an opportunity to accelerate that, to decrease the need for more lanes, more interchanges. There's just as many thoughts on both sides of that discussion, which is really interesting, and far be it for me to decide which is the right side. So we really want to hear kind of both viewpoints.
Anything we didn't discuss that you want to add in?
No, I think that's it. I think just a reminder, this Thursday evening at the town office at 6 o'clock in Williston, we'll be there in person, and then also on the envision89.com website. Up on the screen you can see we also have Twitter and Facebook pages or sites. People can go and follow the news on the project.
Awesome. David, thanks so much for coming on the program this month.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next, let's take a look at things going on around town in our Community Notebook segment. So Town Meeting 2020 is coming right up. Our town meeting's Monday, March 2nd, starts at 7 p.m. in the Williston Central School Auditorium. We'll have Australian ballot voting on Tuesday, March 3rd. The polls are open from 7 in the morning to 7 at night at the Armory, right next to the Town Hall Annex in the village. If you'd like to request an absentee ballot for town meeting, please call the clerk's office at 878-5121, or you can stop by the town hall to vote early. We've got most of the ballots in this week, so you can stop by and vote anytime. The third tax payment installment of this fiscal year is due by February 15th. You can pay in person, by mail, or via the drop box at the town clerk's office. And a lot of things this time of year. Dog licenses are now available as well in the town clerk's office. And remember, you need to register your dog by April 1st. Our winter parking ban is still in effect. There's no parking on town roads from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. This allows our public works crew space for winter operations. And always remember, don't crowd the plow on the road. Some news from our recreation department. The spring program guide is going to be out on February 13th. And on that day, lacrosse program registrations open, along with summer camp registration starting that day. Some of the programs we have coming up are an AHA Heart Saver CPR course, a healthy eating workshop, a Tai Chi for seniors, and a Ninja Science Day camps available during February break coming up later this month. A reminder, our service request portal is available online. It's a convenient way to request non-emergency services, like a pothole, a tree of concern, planning a zoning issue. And you'll stay updated from the town regarding your requests throughout. If you visit our town website, you can find this link on the home page and you can drop us a line. Reminder, we're on social media. You can follow us on Twitter or like us on Facebook. And always looking for feedback and segment ideas for this show. My contact information is on the screen. So that's going to wrap it up this month on What's Up Williston. I'm your host, Erik Wells. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you around town. Take care.